Hi everyone. We're going to continue with our discussion of CSS, and I just wanted to recap some of the concepts that we've been talking about. So we've talked about inheritance, right? So as we have containers within containers, right? So anything I put to the higher level container, like to the header section or to the experience section, everything within that container is going to take on the styles of the thing at the higher level. So anything that I do at an upper level is going to continue down. Okay. Then we look at the cascade. So you want to know which elements have priority. So we talked about this, right? So the external style sheet changes the most things on the website, but it will be overridden by embedded styles, which are in the head section of individual pages, which in turn will be overridden by inline styles, which are actually written in the HTML itself as an attribute. Okay, so keep those in mind. And then the last part is the box model. So these are the chunks, right? So when we specify header or the div tag or these different things, everything is within a block or a box. So what does that look like? So one of the things, this just gives you an idea of how you might see different boxes, okay? So what we have is when you have a piece of content, so that's going to be a word, right? Or some text or an image, it has this imaginary box around it. And we can define things about the box, okay? So what we can do is we define everything by where it is. So the top of the box, the right of the box, the left of the box, the bottom. And we can specify space within the box itself. So I can put some space between the content and the outside of the box itself. That's padding. I can put a border around it. And by default, the border is invisible. So border, the spacing of it is 0. So it has no definition, but it's there. It's there, but it's invisible. And then the last part is putting space on the outside of the box, which is your margin. Okay? So let's think about this just a little bit. I'm going to activate this PowerPoint here. So let's see how this works, right? So I can put a border around the content. I have space in between the content and the border. And I can talk about top, bottom, left, right. And then say I have another box. The margin is the space between those boxes. So that's how you're wanting to visualize how this works. Okay. And the biggest confusion point that people have with CSS is the difference between padding and margin. And it's easy to mix those two up. Part of it comes with just playing with it. So yesterday, what we did in the last video is we put a background color so we could at least visualize the box. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a border so we can start playing around with the padding and the margin and start to visualize how we might be spacing this content out. Why this is important is because you may want to do some slight tweaks to your layout where you want to move like a button on the page, or you want to move a block of text to a certain part of the page. The way that you're going to do it is with some CSS. Okay, so how does this work in practice? So what we did yesterday is we added some colors so you can see the entire box around header, right? So the header includes the picture, it includes the H1, it includes the address. Now there are invisible boxes around these as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some borders to these, okay? So that you can see those boxes. Okay, so now what I've done here is I've added a border. Now border has a shortcut property just like font. So we played around with font yesterday where I can put the font family and the font size into one style property. Okay. I've gone back to the individual ones on this. So I did it a little bit differently, but I can also do that with border. So what border does is it says, okay, I want a 1 pixel border that's solid and it's the color black. So I can specify different colors. I could specify dotted lines. I could make it really thick if I wanted to. Um, so you can do different things with it and make it the way that you want. You can also specify just one part of the box. So I can only put a line on the top. I can only put a line on the bottom. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it all the way around the box. I'm going to keep it as, I'm going to do 2 pixels just to make it a little bit easier on the eyes, right? Now you'll notice the same thing. The box fills the entire length of this. So what I can do is I can specify widths. So I'm going to say, let's do a width of 100 pixels and see what happens. Now you can see how the box shrinks up. And there's not enough room for the content itself, so it bleeds over. Okay? So I can play around with this width, 200. That makes it a little bigger. I can do 300. And see, when there's not enough space, it puts it onto a new line. So once I get it wide enough, it will include the whole word because there's enough space for everything in there. And notice what happens. It's centering or aligning the text in the center of its own box. It's not centering it in the whole thing. So it looks at the width of the box and then it centers the word within that box itself. Okay? So that's why, and this, we're just specifying the width of the box for the H1. Okay? Now, if I do this for the entire header box, now remember, this is going to add on to any previous styles that I've selected. Now look what happens. So the entire box is limited to 600 pixels. It shrinks up everything. So you can kind of see how you can play around with these different behaviors. And now everything is centered within this, right? But the problem is it's not on the center of the page like we might like. So then maybe we don't restrict the space, so that way it centers in the whole window, okay? And the border helps us visualize that. You can also see this in terms of the border. Let's do the education box so we can kind of see what we're playing with. So I'm going to do the same thing, border of 2 pixels, solid. Now look what happened when I did that. All of a sudden, the space that was between these two vanished. This is where you start to see sometimes CSS exhibits strange behaviors. And what it did is when we had invisible borders, there was nothing there. So it was invisible. So there was a border, but we hadn't specified a width, and we didn't specify a color. So what was happening is there was a border there, but it was the default size and it was invisible. Okay, and I know that seems like that doesn't make any sense. It seems like it's just space, but it's because there was a border there. Now what I can do now is start manipulating the space. If I feel like this part is too close to this line, I can add padding, which is space within the big box on the header, to give me some more breathing room. So what I can do is I can put padding on the bottom, okay? And for that padding on the bottom, so I can add however much space I want. So again, I'm using pixels. And see how that adds a little more space? And like I said, if you want to get a real good sense of what it does, put in a ridiculous number so you can really see what it's doing. And then you know that you're adding space where you want to add space, okay? So that maneuvers this and gets the box where I want it to be. Now, if I want to move this whole box, say I want to move it down so that it's a little bit closer to the education. So like I want to close up this space a little bit. And keep the yellow a little bit further down. I could add some margin, right? So I'm going to try this and see if this does what I want it to do. So I added 10 pixels of margin on the bottom. What did that do? It added space between these two boxes. Now, something that you can do that seems a little counterintuitive is I can add negative margin. Now the boxes overlap. And what's happening now is because there is overlap, the border on the other box disappears because it's covered up by this box. Okay. So what you can do is kind of play around with this and get it to where you might want. So again, if I go ridiculous, right? So I can see which one has priority. Look at that, it's covering it up, but it's kind of visible through the box. So you start to see weird behaviors as the browser tries to render what it is that you're doing. Let's go with that and put a little bit of space between it, and that makes it look a little bit nicer with what we want to do, okay? Now what we might want to do too is on our education, let's do a width, and let's do percentages instead of pixels. Let's do 85%. That's cool, but the box, what I want to do is center the box. So what I might do then is add, what I can do, I can add this property of margin. Oops. Oops. Did I get that wrong? Okay, I'm going to give another border here to give some consistency. Oh, and notice what happened. It butted up against that once I put a border in place. So then what I need to do is add my margin again. Now margin also has a summary like we did here. And what's weird about margin is you can specify one number, you can specify two numbers, you can specify three numbers, or you can specify four. Okay? If I specify one number, that adds an equal amount of space on every side of the box. So watch what happens. So if I say put 10 pixels around the box, notice how it shrunk up on all sides of the box. So I ended up with space on all sides. And again, if you didn't quite see what was happening, let's make it a higher number. So now it's 50 pixels on the top, on the right, on the left, and on the bottom. Okay. Now I can also say, I don't want any on the top and bottom, but only on the right and left. So that has no space on the top and bottom, and that shrinks up. So you've got a lot of ways that you can use this shortcut property as well. So you can do that for margin, and you can do that for padding. But I can also just say, I want margin on the top, and I want it 10 pixels. There we go. Now there's some consistency. So now I've got this looking the way that I want. I can also specify the width on this box if I want to. And then I can add my margin. And remember, syntax matters. So you got to have a colon. You got to make sure you're spelling everything correctly. And you've got to make sure that you have semicolons after each style. Use the open bracket and the closing bracket. Because if I mess any of this up, like if I don't have this, sometimes you'll get weird behavior, okay? Oops. Or if I forget this, see, it doesn't know what to do. So that's why you always, all of that matters in terms of this. Now, the reason, why did this happen? Notice what happened. I had a margin top, 10 pixels, and then I added this, and I said, oh, zero that out. There we go. Or, let's see. Yeah, that's probably the best alternative to do. So now we've got all our different things. Maybe I don't like the amount of space between experience and the top. So let's try. So I'm going to take away some of this. Nope, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. Let's try to do padding top 0. Nope. So now you get the frustrating part, right? because now I'm trying to say, why isn't that doing what I want it to do? So what I would probably do is play around with some form of padding and some form of the border to try and get this to do what I want to do. Um, and actually what it might be is because I have my heading here, maybe I need to do something with the spacing on the heading. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it's just mainly to, so let's play, because notice, remember how I said there's a box here? Because I couldn't get it to do within the box itself. So maybe I need to mess around with this box because there is a box around the H2. So let's try doing that negative trick. There we go. That's a little too much. That's a little closer. Nope. It's not enough. There we go. So let's try 1 pixel. There we go. So now I've got it where I want it. It's spaced where I want it to be spaced. So I could do the same thing on education if I wanted to and fix that. Okay? So that's how boxes work. So we've added on, in addition to putting the background color, remember that background color is the back of the box, color is your foreground color or your font color. And so play around with this to get this to see if you can move some boxes up and down and add some space and center some content and see if you can make that work. Okay? And give that a go before our next video tomorrow. Good luck.